welcome. I'm excited to be talking about Christmas tonight. Sorry, Megan's messaging me. The stream's not working. Now it is. I was really excited about doing this topic. I just thought it was really interesting, and also I know there's this tendency with Christians, sometimes we get a little religious about stuff that is unnecessary, whether it's music or dancing or fill in the blank. We like to get religious about stuff, but I really wanted to go over this because I was like, I had never even heard of why people say there is pagan roots to Christmas and the history behind all of that. I've just always kind of heard the claim every now and then, depending on who you're talking to. Believe it or not, there is actually a pretty large movement or group of people who will make this claim and say that they claim that Christmas is not Christian at all. And in that claim, there are several myths that we're going to take a look at. And some of these myths include things like, is Christmas celebrated in the Bible? You know, whether or not it's celebrated in the Bible. Is December 25th a pagan day? Are Christmas trees a pagan symbol? Is Santa the pagan god Odin? And is there anything wrong with celebrating Christmas? Because if there was something wrong with Christmas, and it really was a pagan holiday, or any holiday for that matter was pagan, then I would be really interested in learning about it. And if I had serious convictions about it after that, then I probably wouldn't celebrate it anymore. So the first, Christmas is not celebrated in the Bible. There's no biblical account of any of Jesus' followers celebrating Jesus' birthday in the New Testament. However, what is in the New Testament is the account of Jesus' birth. And in John it says, the Word became flesh. And this is the very thing that is being celebrated on Christmas. So is there anything wrong with celebrating the coming of Jesus? Well, no, I don't believe there is, because it was a celebrated event. The Magi came from faraway lands to give gifts and meet Jesus. The shepherds came to see him and celebrate his coming, and the angels announced it in Matthew, Luke, and John, who have a particular focus on it. Well, what about the day, December 25th itself? Is there anything pagan about December 25th? Well, atheists will claim that that day is actually the birthday of either Mithras, who was an Iranian god of the sun, justice, and war. They also claim that it is the celebration of Saturnalia, which is a kind of a week-long celebration, or that it's the day of Sol Invictus. And these are the most common ones that you would come across if you're talking to an atheist who knows these topics. Now, these claims originated from a movie called Zeitgeist, and it's actually a YouTube movie. It's about 2 hours long. And this is a conspiracy theory movie. And although a lot of people haven't heard of the movie, the title of the movie, you've likely heard the claims that come from the movie, because it's really reached a lot of people, and a lot of other people have quoted it as a source, like a scholarly source, or cited it as reliable. And the people like celebrities, even college professors, have cited this. 2 examples of this is a movie with Bill Maher, called Religulous, and the book and the movie The Da Vinci Code. In Religulous, Bill Maher quotes the same things that came from Zeitgeist, the movie. And in both of these movies, there's this list of gods that they claim have all these similarities to the story of Jesus in the movie Religulous and in the movie Zeitgeist. The problem is when you attempt to chase down the sources that are quoted by these people, you find that Bill Maher is quoting Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is quoting this other modern source. And that source is quoting another guy, and so on and so on. There's never actually any ancient documents that say any of this stuff. But let's go through the similarities because it's interesting. And if you don't hear about how wrong it is, then when you're confronted with this information by an atheist, or you just hear it maybe on a movie or something, then it might confuse you or even rock you, because you'll think to yourself, whoa, no way, why are these all these similarities? You know, the first time I listened to it, I was wondering to myself, like, holy cow, if all this stuff is really similar, that's pretty unusual, that's strange. It's kind of like the saying, you know, hope for the best but plan for the worst. You always want to prepare your mind for certain kinds of attacks that an atheist may use against you, because the things they say can be very deceptive and convincing if you're unprepared. And keep in mind as I go through these examples that these stories are supposed to be the exact same story of Jesus. So they're presenting it as though they're comparing the two as though they're the same. And they're trying to suggest that the story of Jesus is not unique at all, that the same basic framework for that story can be found throughout the world in a variety of different cultures and characters. So, I forgot the clicker, sorry. And it's not working. Did? Oh, okay. All right, well, the first one is Attis. And it originates in Greece, 1200 BC. Now, the claim that you'll see, this is actually a clip pulled directly from that YouTube video or movie, Zeitgeist. And this is exactly how it'll be presented. It'll say, Attis, born of a virgin, born on December 25th. He was crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days resurrected. He was also, the virgin was, her name was Nana. The next one was Krishna. It says, born of a virgin named Devaki, with a star in the east signaling his birth. He performed miracles with his disciples, and upon his death he was resurrected. Dionysus, born of a virgin on December 25th, he was a traveling teacher who performed miracles such as turning water into wine. He was called the King of Kings, God's only begotten Son, and the Alpha and the Omega, and upon his death he was resurrected. Mithra is said to have been born of a virgin on December 25th, that he had 12 disciples, performed miracles, was dead for 3 days, resurrected, and then the day for worshiping him was Sunday. He was referred to as the truth and the life. And then Horus, there we go, born on December 25th by a virgin named Isis Mary. When he was born, there was a star in the east that signaled his birth, and upon his birth, he was adored by 3 kings. At the age of 12, he was a prodigal child teacher, and at 30, he was baptized and then began his ministry. He had 12 disciples. He traveled around while performing miracles such as healing the sick and walking on water. And he was known by many names such as the Truth, the Light, God's Anointed Son, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God. And after being betrayed by a guy named Typhon, Horus was crucified, buried for 3 days, and resurrected. So this is exactly how it is presented. All the things that I'm saying, same things they said in Zeitgeist. Okay, but now I want to go through each one individually, because then you track down the ancient documents for this stuff, and it ends up not panning out. So the real story of Attis, his birth, is very strange, as is common with Greek mythology. Basically, his father was a hermaphrodite. He had both male and female organs. And the gods feared him, so they cut off his male organ and then threw it to earth, and it grew into an almond tree. And then Addis's mother became accidentally impregnated when she sat underneath the almond tree, and an almond fell on her lap. I guess you could call this a virgin birth, but not quite what happened with Jesus. There's actually no source or mention of December 25th for a birthday for Addis. It's just totally fabricated. As was the crucifixion, the tomb, and the resurrection claim, all of those, there's no ancient source at all that say anything about that. What really happened with the myth of Addis is on his wedding day, his father, or now his mother, I don't know, since the gods castrated him, his dad appeared to the wedding, and out of anger, Addis castrates himself and then bleeds to death and dies. And then his father-in-law, or what was going to be his father-in-law, does the same thing. He castrates himself and dies. There's no resurrection account at all. Addis's father takes his body, because he feels really bad for showing up, I guess, takes his body to Zeus and asks him to preserve it and keep it from rotting. That's it. That's the entire story. There's not like books and books about this guy. That's it. Next is Krishna. Krishna is born from his mother Devaki and her husband, I should have pronounced this at home, Vasudeva. So clearly not a virgin birth. I mean, mom and dad, they had him. That's just what it says in the story. Not like there was ever a claim that he was born of a virgin. He also had an older brother, Balarama, and later they had his younger sister, and this is all just normal means. Although these are deities, they had babies the normal way. There's also no source that says Krishna's birth was signified by a star in the east. There's just nothing that says anything about that. Krishna is depicted usually as having blue or black skin and playing a flute. He was known as a god of mischief, and he loved to steal and eat butter. So a lot of statues would have him with a ball of butter, and he would just be mowing down on a big old ball of butter. He was a cow herder, and he liked to play pranks on people. The miracles he was credited with performing includes things like holding a mountain up with his pinky finger for 3 days. He duplicated his body into 16,108 identical bodies, and they all sat around eating butter together. He showed the whole universe in his mouth. When he opened his mouth, you could see the whole universe. And then he robed a royal woman with a sari, I don't know how to pronounce it, S-A-R-I, and it could never be taken off. It's just never able to be removed. It wouldn't be surprising, it shouldn't be surprising, when there's a story of a deity and there's miraculous deeds associated with them, but the key is that the miracles are nothing like the ones that Jesus did. And even if there were similarities, it wouldn't be too big of a deal, but the claim here is that these figures are parallels to Jesus, and that's just not what the evidence shows. So no, the miracles are not like that of Jesus. Krishna is killed by a hunter who mistook him for a deer while he was sleeping, and he shot him with a bow and arrow through the only weak spot he had, which was on his heel. That might sound familiar to you because that same story is with Achilles in Greek mythology. So they likely adopted parts of that story with the story of Krishna. Achilles, his mom held him by his heel and dipped him in a pool of immortality, so just where her fingers were was his only weak spot. There's no resurrection story with Krishna because when he died, he ascended to a kind of heaven immediately after his death. So no resurrection. It's just not in the story. Dionysus. He was supposed to be born of a virgin, but in reality, he was either the result of an affair between Zeus and a human princess, or between Zeus and his daughter Persephone. Either way, not born of a virgin. There's no reference to a December 25th date in the birth of the story of Dionysus at all. So another just kind of fabricated fact in there. He supposedly performed miracles, but our response should be, so what? Like I said with Krishna, you'd expect to hear stories of miraculous things when talking about a deity. But all that he did was give people wine. So it's not even like, and many atheists will actually say, aha, he turned water into wine. That's the parallel. That's the similarity. But in the many, many stories of Dionysus making wine, he never once turned water into wine. And it wouldn't matter if he did, but he just didn't. You can see how many of these attacks come from a place of deception and with totally and sometimes even intentionally ignorance of the truth. He supposedly was referred to as King of Kings, but there's no source for that. Or for Alpha and the Omega. And it doesn't make sense anyway because he wasn't that kind of god. This would have been someone like Zeus. He was the king of the gods, not the god of wine. This guy was like a low-tier level god. And he was never called anything like this. There actually is a resurrection kind of story, but the interesting thing with these kinds of comparisons is that the skeptics will ignore all of the details and try to say that it's the same thing. The real story always ends up being different in almost every way, and these people will still try to relate the stories to Jesus in a deceptive way to attempt to plant doubt in your mind or spread a lie around, because it's not good enough for them to just not believe in Jesus. They need everyone else to disbelieve, even if it's because of lies. So basically, Dionysus was ripped apart. He ripped to shreds by Titans because Hera, who was Zeus's wife, was really mad at him. And then his heart is taken and made into kind of like a seed and then placed inside of a new mother so that he had a second birth. So this is in no way comparable to the death and 3 days later resurrection of Jesus. It's just the strange mythical stuff that you hear in typical Greek mythology. The interesting thing about this weird resurrection story also is that it postdates Christianity. And this seems to be a trend among a lot of these similarities between Christianity and other figures or religions. It appears if there was any borrowing taking place from one story to another, then it was the popularity of Christianity that caused these other religions to try to piggyback off of that. But it is Christianity that always has refused to change and compromise the beliefs or add and take anything away. Okay, Mithra. Mithra was not born of a virgin. It's just not true. Mithra is said to have been born fully grown out of a rock while wearing a hat. There's a sculpture of him right here. That's him being born. He only had one or two disciples, depending on which sect of Mithra you agree with. And Mithra is known for one great activity that you see time and time again, which is, as far as miracles go, whoa, what is going on? I just spazzed out. He killed a bull. And you see this in all kinds of statues of him. Most of the statues will be him killing that bull. And we're not sure why. That's just what he's known for. Mithra did not die for 3 days. There's actually no record of him dying at all. And if there's no record of him dying, then it's pretty difficult to have a resurrection. All right. The Mithra cult did not become popular until the 2nd century AD, and Christians had been worshiping on Sunday long before that. The Bible recounts the disciples gathering on Sunday immediately after the resurrection of Christ. But these movies claim that Sunday worship of Mithra predates Christianity instead of just imitating Christianity later, like the evidence shows. So Horus was supposedly born on December 25th, but according to what calendar you read, he was born either between August 24th and 28th in the ancient Egyptian calendar, or mid-July according to the Julian calendar. So either way, not December 25th. And the inaccuracy of these claims is only partially directed at these supposed coincidences that are clearly false. The claims prove their own lack of knowledge about these subjects because Christianity never claimed that Jesus was born on December 25th. And later I'll go into why we actually settled on that date, or some reasons why we probably settled on that date. But the claim has never been that Jesus was born on that day. As a matter of fact, Eastern Orthodox and Ethiopian churches celebrate Jesus' birth on January 7th. They don't claim that Jesus was born on that day. That's just the day they celebrate his birth, like we do on December 25th. But the Bible doesn't tell us when Jesus was born. We're just celebrating his birth on that day. Even if there was a deity that was born on that date, it would be irrelevant to Christ's birthday. But as we look into these claims, we find that they're totally false, and that's the point here. They're claiming, well, Christianity says Jesus was born on December 25th, and look, these gods were too. And that's just not what Christianity is claiming anyway, so they clearly don't even understand the institution they're attacking. But the atheists will continue to cite these sources regardless of how inaccurate they are, and even college professors will use these examples. It just reveals an utter lack of research in the topic because these claims have been thoroughly refuted by atheists and theist scholars alike. So Horus was supposedly born of a virgin, but what actually happened is a little graphic, so I'll try to maneuver around the specific details. His father was Osiris, and his mother was Isis. Osiris had been killed and ripped to pieces, and then his mother used her magic to piece him back together and reanimate him in order to get pregnant. How is this a virgin birth exactly? There's no claim that it was a virgin birth. Supposedly, the birth was signified by a star in the east, but there's just no source for this. It's totally fabricated, and we don't even know where the story came from. Horus was said to have 3 kings who adored him, but again, there's no source anywhere to say this. Plus, the Bible doesn't say that about Jesus either. There were an unknown number of magi who were advisors to kings, more than likely. But we don't know there were 3. We just know there were 3 gifts. And if you think about it, these guys were really important. They likely would have been traveling with an entourage, either to protect them on the road or to carry their stuff. Matthew 2 says that after the Magi saw the star appear, which signified Jesus' birth, then they went to Jerusalem and spoke to King Herod. So Jesus was already born when they started traveling to see him. This is another thing that our nativity scenes, get wrong, because we see 3 wise men there in the manger with Jesus at the time of his birth. But the word used for child in Matthew, it's used several times to refer to Jesus, actually refers to a specific word that refers to a kid who's older than an infant and younger than 5, so maybe a toddler. And this makes sense too, because in verse 11 it says that they came to the house, not the manger, when they arrived to meet Jesus and Mary. There's some speculation that if these magi were from the same place that Daniel was, which kind of makes sense because Daniel, he could have prophesied about the coming Messiah and told these magi, which is why they were looking for him. And he was in charge of the magi, so it just makes sense. But the speculation is if they were from where he was from, that's the ancient city Uruk, which is about 220 kilometers south of modern-day Baghdad, Iraq. And I looked it up how long it would take for someone to walk from there to Jerusalem. And without stopping, it would have taken 2 years to make it to Jerusalem. That's for a man. Women apparently walked slower. It said it would take them longer. I'm not saying that they were from there, but that's just what a lot of scholars believe because of the whole Daniel thing. Anyways, Horace was supposedly a teacher at age 12, but again, there's just no source that even claims that. And Jesus wasn't a teacher at age 12 anyway. He was asking questions at the temple. And it wouldn't matter if he was, but that's just not what the text says. Zeitgeist also says that Horace was baptized and his ministry began at the age of 30, but there's nothing even resembling a baptism in the story of Horace. The closest thing to baptism in the story of Horace is that he was associated with the god of embalming, but that's nothing like baptism. It's just a very Egyptian thing. The movie says that Horace had 12 disciples, but again, it's just not true. Horace is said to have 4 followers of Horace. It also claims that Horace was crucified and resurrected 3 days later. But what really happened in the myths of Horace is he was stung to death by a giant scorpion. And there's no account of him resurrecting once he was dead. So these are the claims made by this movie. And I thought it was important because we're talking about things that are compared to the story of Jesus, and it just felt like something that was really worth mentioning. And the big problem here is that article after article will be produced presenting these claims as true, and like everything you thought you knew about Christianity is a lie. But in reality, the evidence shows that these claims are just totally false. And they'll continually cite each other and use these same examples year after year, because it's not about being true, it's about planting seeds of doubt. It's like there's this great disdain for the belief in God among atheists, and you can really just feel their hatred whenever you speak to them. You would expect an atheist, though, to have no emotion towards God at all if they didn't actually believe in him, because to them he doesn't exist. So they're just being angry at nothing. So why are they so mad at him? Why do they hate him so much? Maybe there's a lot more going on under the surface. But I wanted to go into December 25th. Why did we come to that date? Where does that date actually come from? Is it really a pagan day like people claim? So you'll actually see signs like this sometimes posted along highways and stuff. It'll say like, Happy Saturnalia, because that's what you're actually celebrating, you idiot Christian. Is December 25th really a celebration of Saturnalia? Saturnalia is a Roman celebration that took place, and the actual day for it was the 17th. But over time, they extended it a little farther and a little farther until the latest that it went was the 23rd. So it ended up being this week-long celebration because they enjoyed it so much. But at its longest, it was only ever a week long. And they actually did do something similar to what we do for Christmas today, which is they would go around to people's houses singing, but they would do this naked. So, not quite the same. The way this would start is they would go to the temple of Saturnalia, or maybe to the public square, and they'd start it off with a human sacrifice. And then they'd have a public banquet. I hope they're not eating what they sacrificed. The festival had a bunch of traditions that would take place. This was like a time of breaking the rules, debauchery, and overeating. Gambling was permitted during this time, which normally it was either illegal or at least really frowned upon. There was this role reversal that took place between slaves and masters, and the masters would serve food to the slaves instead of the other way around. And the slaves were supposed to be allowed to disrespect their masters without threat of punishment, but the whole thing is kind of like tongue-in-cheek, and the masters did this as a way of actually mocking the slaves, so it'd be like, ha-ha, serving them food and making fun of them. It was like a big game. And although the slaves were supposed to be allowed to disrespect the masters, and the masters weren't supposed to punish them during this celebration, they could do whatever they wanted to them after the celebration, so the slaves are not going to actually disrespect them, because at a certain point it's going to end, and then it's going to be bad for them. Everything I read seems to indicate that this was a game that was done at the expense of the slaves. It was not legitimately like they were the masters for a week. Plus, the slaves still had to cook all the food and do all this, and so then the masters would just like serve it to them. It was just, it's not like they were in the kitchen cooking it for the slaves and stuff. There was a gift-giving aspect to this on December 19th, and there were usually things like pottery or wax figurines, or more likely some form of gag gift. And there would be one person at each gathering that was assigned the role of ruler of the Saturnalia, and whatever he said goes. So if he says everyone has to sing naked, then everyone has to do that, or any other ridiculous thing he comes up with, they had to obey it, period. Rape and sexual immorality were really, really common during this time. It was just considered a time of breaking the rules. So what exactly is it about Christmas that people compare to Saturnalia? Is it the fact that both Christmas and Saturnalia had some form of singing going on or some form of gift giving? If you go to Israel or other areas in the world, they just sing at different times of the day. But we wouldn't point at them and go, they're celebrating Saturnalia. I mean, that's just, and the same goes with gift giving. Every time there's a birthday, we don't assume someone's celebrating Saturnalia. There's way more differences between the two holidays than similarities. And when I explain the celebration itself, did anything sound like Christmas to you when you hear that? You just, like, are you visualizing, this sounds just like Christmas? No, not so much. If the intent for Christmas was to replace Saturnalia, then it would have been placed on the 17th, not the 25th. It wasn't until Emperor Constantine made Christmas an official holiday in the Julian calendar in AD 336 that Christians were recorded to have begun celebrating Christmas. Before that, the two big holidays were Easter and Epiphany, which was on January 6th, and that commemorated the arrival of the Magi after Jesus' birth. The reason Constantine named December 25th as the date, no one really knows why, but there are a lot of theories that people have, and one theory is that he wanted to make it easier for Rome's pagan subjects to accept Christianity as the empire's official religion. You know, if it was similar to something they already had, it was easier for them to transition. He wanted it to coincide with those pagan holidays, but as a way of diminishing those and replacing them. The actual birth of Jesus is thought to be sometime in the spring, and the presence of shepherds out sleeping with their sheep at night is kind of a clue in the text to that. It's also thought by ancient Hebrew tradition that prophets died on the same day that they were born, and so many scholars conclude that Jesus was crucified in the spring. The Roman holiday, Natalis Sol Invictus, was on December 25th. So some people say that's actually what Christmas was supposed to replace. And here's a coin that just that's like the Sol Invictus coin. The problem is the first account we have that references Sol Invictus is from the 4th century. And that source is actually referring to Jesus' birth being December 25th. We don't know a lot about Sol Invictus, but the phrase means the unconquered sun, S-U-N, because it is the point in the season where the days will begin to get longer and the sun begins the next cycle in the seasons. So having Christmas on that day Could have been entirely symbolic as well, as far as when the days start to get longer and everything. It's the last day, the lowest point in the sky the sun will get. And then it's reborn and it starts getting higher and higher again. There's a really interesting theory with star charts called the Star of Bethlehem, and it's an hour long, and you can watch it on YouTube, but a summary of it is that these 3 stars called the Wise Men, which are the 3 that make up the belt of Orion, they point to the Star of Bethlehem. And I just thought it was really cool. When I look at the chart, I don't think it really points at it. It's more like, the stars are going this way, and then you have to go way down to, but I guess, people draw things up in the sky all the time, and I'm like, how did you get there? That doesn't look anything like what I saw. But it's still cool to watch. The video is interesting. And then there's also this other view that December 25th is when the Magi arrived. And I mentioned all these different options because, for a really important reason, it's because we don't know. But when atheists make these claims that people, about, Saturnalia and all this stuff, people just believe it because it's like, if there's a negative accusation about Christianity, then it's just assumed to be true. Well, what about Christmas trees? Are Christmas trees pagan? They're just evil. Some people will point to Jeremiah 10:2-5 and say that God forbids Christmas trees as an idol, because this is what the verse says. For the practices of the people are worthless. They cut a tree out of the forest, and a craftsman shapes it with his chisel. They adorn it with silver and gold. They fasten it with hammer and nails so it will not totter. So when you first read that, especially out of context, you're like, oh man, that sounds like Christmas trees. But with a more careful reading of the text, the truth is a little more obvious. Well, first off, it says, the craftsman shapes it with his chisel. A craftsman doesn't shape a Christmas tree. What it's being talked about here is idols. These are some of the poles of Ashera, or similar to the poles of Ashera. So this is like a tree that has been crafted. In the very next verse, it says, like a scarecrow in a cucumber field, their idols cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot walk. Do not fear them. They can do no harm, nor can they do any good. They cannot speak is making a distinction because they have mouths. You carve an idol with a mouth, but they can't speak. So God's saying they're powerless, they're useless. Although they have mouths, they're just totally useless. The Roman cult of Ashera is said to have had trees in their home for cult worship practice, but you can't find a single historical source that proves this. And even if you could, unless we are using Christmas trees as some kind of cultish practice today, it's just totally irrelevant. If I bring a tree into my house for Christmas because I think it looks nice, then what about that is cultish? I don't get the real tree anymore because of the mess, but I love the smell, and a lot of people get real Christmas trees for that very reason. So are we committing some sort of pagan act because we like the smell or the look of Christmas trees? Well, no, of course not. Now, there's an oral legend on where Christmas trees come from. And I say oral legend because there's not a historical record of it. But the oral legend says that in 1536, Martin Luther was walking through the woods at night, and he looked up at the sky, the night sky, and he saw the stars kind of glimmering through the trees. And it made him think about how Christ left heaven to come down to earth to dwell with us. Then he takes a small tree home and he hangs candles all over it as a way to illustrate that thought to his kids, because he thought it was just a really beautiful kind of metaphor. This is a legend, but it's also the most solid source we have for why people use Christmas trees. This also explains for why about 300 years until the mid-1800s, it was predominantly a German practice. At this time, the British royals, the family, popularized it because the German Prince Albert imported several of his fir trees from his hometown in Coburg, Germany. And this happened all the time, but what changed is in the mid-1800s, there were these art drawings that would go out to the public, and the royal family was kind of like the Keeping Up with the Kardashians. They were celebrities. People loved them and started to kind of imitate them. Everyone was always really interested in what they were doing. They still kind of are. You see tabloids of them all the time when you go through the checkout or something, even here in America. But they would be looking at what they were wearing, what they were celebrating, what they were doing. And they had this fascination with them. So people of the time saw these drawings of the family around their Christmas tree. And sometimes it was on the mantle. And then they just started imitating them. So what was a German tradition eventually became an English habit, and then eventually got very popularized in America too. So is there anything about trees that are inherently pagan? Like all trees are just pagan? Well, no. Is there anything pagan about putting a tree inside of your house? Like as soon as it crosses the doorway, suddenly it becomes pagan. Well, no, of course not. If you don't like trees and you don't want them in your house, that's fine. But you don't then get to turn around and say all trees are bad and everyone else is performing pagan acts because you don't like trees. Is there anything pagan about decorating a tree? It's like trees are fine, but as soon as you start putting lights and candy on it, it's Satan. Now it's bad. So if this cult of Ashera was pagan, then what exactly was it about them that was pagan? Well, it was their purpose. If some cult out there uses a particular item in their pagan rituals, this doesn't mean that all those objects are now ruled out for all of eternity and tainted because they used it. Because if this was the case, then we couldn't sing in church because pagans use singing in their rituals. And this doesn't mean that singing is now inherently evil for all time. So why were the things the pagans did pagan? Because they made it pagan. It's about your intent. Christmas is not pagan. The day is not pagan. The way we celebrate it is not pagan. And Christmas is not threatened by ancient paganism. What it is threatened by, though, is modern secularism. You see this all the time in small ways, such as our culture not wanting to say Merry Christmas anymore, like they're embarrassed to say it. You know, now everyone has to say Happy Holidays. Next is Santa Claus. I wanted to get into Santa Claus a little bit. So Santa, he comes from three different figures, some that are real and some that are made up. One is St. Nicholas, who was a real person, then Father Christmas, who's a mythical figure, and then Santa Claus, who is just a mix of the two, basically. Santa Claus changes all the time. I thought I had, okay, well, here's the Coca-Cola Santa. It wasn't until 1931 that we got this fat guy in a red suit, because Coca-Cola marketed him that way, and it was really successful for them, because their colors are red and white. Before that, though, he was depicted as being in green or brown, sometimes blue, and he wasn't always fat. Sometimes he wasn't fat, sometimes he was. And he was actually an elf. Now he's human, but he has elves with him, so maybe it just changed over the time. And Santa's always changing. You know, he used to come down the chimney, but now he can like freeze time and teleport and stuff. So St. Nicholas was a bishop of Myra in the 300s AD. And this is what a depiction of him. It's not what he actually looked like, probably. There's not really a lot of historical information about him. Most of the information that exists about St. Nicholas is just this like abundance of legends that have been made up about him. And one of the most popular legends are that when his parents died, they left him a bunch of money, but he didn't keep any of it. Instead, he would go around to people's, when they're sleeping, go into their windows and throw bags of gold in their windows. The most popular one is this one here, where there's these 3 girls, and I'm not sure why, but they're being forced into a life of prostitution. And so he throws a bag of gold into their windows so they didn't have to go into that life. In some of the stories, people would leave their shoes by the windowsill or on the windowsill, and he would put money in it as he went by. And this could be a connection with us hanging stockings, not really sure. In another legend, he supposedly traveled a long distance to the Council of Nicaea just to punch Arius right in the face, who's this heretic who's trying to basically say that the Trinity is not the Trinity. He was taking away from the Trinity. So he comes all the way from Germany just to punch him right in the face. And then he goes home. That's it. Basically, there's this false claim where people say this is the place where Christianity was, the books of the Bible were voted into the Bible, the Council of Nicaea. And I'm actually going to do, probably when we come back from Christmas and New Year's, we'll do one on the Council of Nicaea. But in Dutch, St. Nicholas's name is Sinterklaas. I didn't mean to get an accent there. That was weird. So you can see how the name Santa Claus formed. Modern-day Santa Claus is much different. There's this influence from a variety of different cultures. Martin Luther actually hated Santa because he thought the figure took away from Jesus so much that we all needed to refocus on Jesus. And he kind of invented a term, Christkindl, which means Christ child. And so he was really pushing Christkindl. But over time, people forgot what the name referred to, and Kris Kringle came from it, which just turned into another name for Santa. So the term Kris Kringle, or the name Kris Kringle, literally exists just because people forgot about Jesus. It's kind of sad. The secular Santa that we all think of when we think of Santa has nothing to do with St. Nicholas, except for the fact that Santa has multiple different influences, one of them being St. Nick. So as we wrap things up for the night, I have a few questions for you to consider when I was thinking about this topic. Is there anything inherently pagan about any particular day, or specifically December 25th? No. Nobody is celebrating Saturnalia when they celebrate Christmas today, hopefully. Romans 14:5-6 says, "One person esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes the day observes it to the Lord, and he who does not observe the day, to the Lord he does not observe it. He who eats, eats to the Lord, for he gives God thanks. And he who does not eat to the Lord, he does not eat and give God thanks." It seems to be this really great Christian principle that with non-essential issues, we can just not worry about it. Is it biblical to celebrate a holiday in general? I mean, the Old Testament gave several holidays for the Jews to celebrate. It's important for us to remember the things that God has done and to celebrate those things as a way to help us remember. We forget things so quickly. I can't tell you how many times I've seen God move in my own life, and these ways that he has moved has just convinced me so thoroughly that I should be so firm in my belief. I should never, ever waver ever again for the rest of my life. But time and time again, I'll find myself doubting or being afraid and not trusting God because I've forgotten the things that he's done. Or maybe it's just not as, the feelings aren't there like they were when it happened. The disciples did this too, all the time. Almost immediately after witnessing Jesus perform a miracle, they would doubt. we need things like holidays or sometimes routines to help us remember to be grateful for all God has done for us. But should we celebrate new holidays, though, that are not in the Old Testament? Well, Jesus did. He celebrated Hanukkah by attending the Feast of Dedication in John 10. The question is whether your Christmas is a secular Christmas or a Christ-centered one. It doesn't matter if you like Christmas trees, lights, presents, or even Santa, but those things should not be more important than Jesus. And just to be clear, it's not like even if there is no Christ in your Christmas, that it's suddenly pagan. This is more of a question of how Christians have been influenced by the secular world. I personally love Christmas. I know many people will say that Easter's their favorite holiday, or maybe Thanksgiving, because the main theme is one of, giving thanks rather than just being super materialistic like Christmas. But something about the music, the colors, just the feel that I would have as a kid during the holidays, it's really stuck with me. I still feel that excitement every year as Christmas approaches. Even though I'm not the one anymore waking up to open up all the presents, it's still exciting. And then the day after Christmas, I get a little sad, just like, it's over. Now, I can't say all of the excitement that I feel or the original reason I fell in love with Christmas has anything to do with Jesus, because I wasn't raised in a Christian home. But now that I am a Christian, I basically have even more reason to love Christmas. Easter is definitely much more important as a holiday or as a reason to celebrate, because Jesus' birth is awesome and great, but the reason for our hope is because he died and rose again 3 days later. So I don't want to diminish anything from Easter. I'm just saying that my personal favorite is Christmas. Some things that have changed, though, in our household since putting Christ at the center of our Christmas. We still do have presents. We still enjoy the company of friends and family. Still have Santa up sometimes as far as decorations go. But we started telling the girls that Santa isn't real, because as a child, all the credit is given to this, mythological person or mythical person, rather than the one who the credit is really owed. Plus, Megan and I both had like this feeling of it's just like you're lying to your kid their whole life, and then when they find out, at least for Megan, she was really hurt by it. And so it's like, if we just give the credit to Jesus from the get-go, we never have to lie about it. When they grow up, they don't grow out of a lie, they just grow into the truth. And the good news is it's not like we have to kill their dreams, and this is kind of how it's portrayed, is if you tell your kids Santa isn't real, you're basically spawn of Satan. I don't think every home needs to do the same thing just because we do. I'm just saying that sometimes we'll come to an impasse when being a Christian who lives in a secular country, secular culture, a secular world, and this is going to be like a personal decision that everyone has to make for themselves, their family. But if there's ever a time where there's something you love that doesn't seem to be a bad thing at first, but you feel like God's telling you to cut that out, then you need to choose obedience to God over your feelings, for sure. My advice would be this: enjoy these symbols that are used in the Christmas celebration, and be free from fearing that there may be any pagan or sinful connection to those symbols, but make Christ the focus of Christmas. Maybe look into some ideas on how you can make Christmas more symbolic of Christ for your kids. Maybe the food you eat. Megan and I, we do a new food that we've never tried before, something crazy and usually gross. Or just traditions that you implement into your family. They can be a symbol that you can work in. You can use the Christmas tree thing that Martin Luther did, or invent a new idea that's totally unique. Christmas also gives us an opportunity to share the gospel with people that is pretty unique to the time of year. People are singing hymns. They don't even know that they're hymns, but they're singing hymns. They're, saying Merry Christmas, so you can be like, oh, I love Christmas. Do you know why we celebrate Christmas, like what it comes from, you can take advantage of that. Well, I hope that this message has blessed you and that you can go into the season maybe with a little more confidence than before. Maybe you haven't heard these things. They're totally alien to you, but knowing this information now may prevent you from being stumbled in the future if you find yourself having a conversation with someone or an argument with an atheist or something.